Choosing to go to helicopter flight school is a huge decision. There are a ton of variables you need to think about. In this video, we are going to discuss 5 critical things you need to know about helicopter flight school.
That's like autopilot, dude.
How do you fly a helicopter? Well, I'm going to show you.
Now, I have tons of videos on my channel that cover a bunch of different aspects of helicopter flight school. These are kind of 5 just random areas that you might want to start thinking about if you're thinking about going to flight school. The first one we're going to get started with is fleet and equipment. All right, so the first aspect that we want to discuss in fleet and equipment is, are the helicopters modern, well-maintained, and reliable? Now, there's a couple different aspects. Let's kind of dig into each one of these. As I wrote here in blue, the helicopters don't necessarily need to be new, but they must be well-maintained. So this is the biggest factor. You know, I have flown some helicopters that are 10, 20, maybe even 30 years old, but they were well maintained. They had all their documentation, and you couldn't really tell. After 2,200 hours, they were overhauled. They look pretty new, so you couldn't really tell. As long as they were well maintained, you can still fly them, but that's the biggest factor you need to think about. The other thing you need to think about here is the avionics type. If you are just going to get your private pilot's license and your commercial pilot's license and you're not concerned about IFR or your instrument rating, then maybe you don't need to worry about this. But if you're thinking about doing your instrument rating, you may want to consider going to a school that has at least some sort of glass cockpit. Now, you can absolutely do all of your instrument ratings on steam gauges and basic HSIs and VORs. However, that's very challenging, and that's not the way the industry is or professional commercial jobs are. Every single helicopter, pretty much every single helicopter that's flying around doing commercial work has some sort of glass cockpit, touchscreen GPS type of system. So you may want to try to get some education on that. So these are things you should be thinking about when you're choosing the fleet type that you might go to school with. Does the school have a diverse fleet for versatile training? A bunch of schools just have one platform, and that is okay. You want to potentially try to go to a school that has maybe 1 or 2 or 3 different types of helicopters, and preferably maybe even a different brand. The reason why is it's good to get experience on a different type of helicopter, especially if you just are training in the Robinson R22. It's really valuable to go fly a bigger helicopter like the Robinson R44. If you're flying in the Cabri G2, maybe you should go get some R22 experience. If you're flying in the Robinson or the Cabri, which is a piston engine helicopter, maybe you want to do a flight or 2 or more in a Robinson R66 or a Bell 206. These are turbine helicopters. Diversity, it doesn't really make the biggest difference, but it is worth trying a different helicopter for a couple of flights. The next one is huge. Are there backup helicopters to avoid training delays, and how many people are on the maintenance team? In aviation, we shorten maintenance to MX. It's just an easy shorthand. This is a huge thing to think about. If you're going to a flight school with 1 or 2 or 3 helicopters, there's a good chance that at some point 2 or 3 of them are going to be down for maintenance. If that happens, it's really challenging to maintain progress and keep going. You want a school that either has like a good, really strong maintenance program, hopefully multiple maintainers, mechanics on that team, or that they just have quite a few helicopters and that they can keep helicopters operational. The next point, location matters. There are multiple different reasons why location matters, and it's a huge deal, but the first one and the biggest one is weather impacts your training schedule. So you need to think about where you're training. Is it sunny? Is it a snowy climate? Does it typically get kind of windy? Are there the potential for hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes? If you're in Florida, you got hurricanes. If you're in Hawaii, you got tornadoes. If you're in Hawaii, you got volcanoes. If you're in the South or the Midwest, you've got tornadoes. These are things you need to think about. These storms come through, and we all like to fly in the summer. We've got good days, but what happens with good days is you get storms. If you're in upstate New York like me, we have pretty strong windy winters. We get a lot of snow up here. California is a great place to train. Hawaii is a great place to train. Hawaii also gets very windy. Arizona is a great place to train, but it's also very hot. That could affect density altitude. We're kind of going to talk about that on the next slide. So these are all things you need to think about. Like I just alluded to, specialized training in unique environments is like mountains or controlled airspace. High density altitude is good for experience, but it could limit flights. If you're training in Colorado, which has a base altitude of like 5,000 feet, that's my home state, that's where I'm from. Sometimes in the summer, they've got density altitudes that are extremely high. When the air is warm and there's not a lot of density in the air, we call this a high density altitude, the helicopter does not perform well. So if you're flying with your instructor, maybe you can't go do auto rotations. Sometimes they can't even ground the fleet if it's really hot. They just don't have the performance to fly in a piston helicopter. Turbine helicopters are still fine. Where's the flight school? Is it at a busy airport? Training out of a busy airport is really good because you get really confident with air traffic control, radio, dealing with other aircraft, spotting, traffic avoidance. These are all great skills as a pilot. However, it can make it kind of challenging because there's always so much going on and you can't just focus on purely stick skills. If you're out in the boonies, not next to anyone else, you can focus purely on just flying the helicopter. Pros and cons to both, and you need both capabilities, but these are things that you might want to think about for your individual circumstance. The next one, how accessible is the school for commuting or relocation? Location, location, location. This is huge. A long, difficult commute can add stress, while an easy to reach location can make training smooth and consistent. When I went to flight school, the flight school was like 8 minutes from where I was staying, one straightaway road. It was really pleasant and I really enjoyed that. I could just use that time to chill, think about what I'm going to be doing on the flight. If you're in a very urban and dense area like Denver, Florida, California, places in Texas, New York, long drives are actually going to drain you. Everyone knows this. A long stressful drive where you have to dealing with traffic and it's just a long drive. This is energy, and if you're going to go fly a helicopter, which is a very demanding process, you need to be at the top of your mind. So you want to be kind of close to your flight school if you can. Sometimes that's not always possible. It is a huge quality of life increase to be close to your flight school. The next subject area is instructor quality and training style. Now this one is really interesting here, and I put a pros and cons list. We'll kind of go over it. Are the instructors experienced pilots with real flight knowledge? I say real flight knowledge. Any certified flight instructor has real flight knowledge, but maybe they haven't really been out into the real world yet. If they just graduated flight school and they're working as a flight instructor, that's fine. They're totally safe and they absolutely know what they're talking about, and they're probably at the top of their game. They just don't have real experience. There's pros and cons. Let's go over this. All right, the pros: if someone is already like a professional pilot and they have like real flight experience, they have real world insights beyond the textbooks. They're probably better at emergency and risk training, and they have stronger industry guidance and career tips. They can kind of help you. They've been out there, they've done it, they know what the industry actually looks like. Maybe that's someone that's still just in the flight school environment doesn't. But some of the cons to this: experience doesn't always mean good teaching. There is a risk of outdated teaching methods, and there's potentially a higher training cost because you have a more experienced person. You know, if you've got a young, eager CFI, they'll work for less, so maybe your flight training costs are less. Also, someone that's been doing this for a really long time, maybe they're not in the books as much, maybe they don't have all the up-to-date knowledge and procedures for the industry. Pros and cons: I had very new instructors. That's the way my school was set up. Mauna Loa Helicopters, people that just graduated, they were working as flight instructors. I really enjoyed it because they had all the knowledge. They were extremely sharp. They've been in the books for years. They really know what's going on. They hadn't been out in the industry, so that there's some hindrances there, but I enjoyed that. Think about this when you're choosing a flight school. How approachable and supportive are the instructors and staff? You want to be in a good environment. I won't harp too much on this, but you don't want to be like in a negative environment where people are really like, it's a dog eat dog world. You want people that lift each other up. A rising tide lifts all boats. You don't want people going after each other. So that's something to think about. If you're looking at a flight school and you're touring, ask for a demo flight to see their teaching style in action. Ask to go with an instructor, pay their cost, whatever their hourly rate is, and just like go for a training flight. Say, hey, I just want you to teach me some stuff, and just see how they teach and see how you respond to it. I'd recommend recording this too so you can go back and watch it. Just a fun idea. The next thing you need to look at is their safety record. How frequently are helicopters inspected and maintained? This should be happening every day. Or thinking about a flight school, you should visit in person. They should show you the logbooks containing maintenance and inspection records without hesitation. That's a given. If you go like, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a student, can I just see your guys' maintenance records? They should pull them all out. They don't have to, but if they want you as a student and they want you to spend tens of thousands of dollars, of course they're going to want to show you that if they're up to par with everything. They should be well maintained, they should be clear, they should be legible. You should see dates, signatures, written out explanations of what was performed, when, and why. What's the school's safety culture and protocol for emergencies? You could also ask about their safety management system and risk matrix. Flying helicopters is inherently dangerous and sometimes things happen. You want to know what their protocol is for emergencies. What's the phone tree? How are they going to communicate? What's the school's stance going to be? Are they going to do a stand down? How are they going to respond? How do they think about emergencies? You can also ask if they have a safety management system or a risk matrix. This is a way to minimize the risk of an incident. We do this in the professional world every single time we go on a flight. We go through this checklist, a matrix, and we determine if there's ways we can minimize the risk. If our risk is too high, we don't take the flight. So this is something flight schools are doing now too. So this is something you should ask about. Research the school's accident and safety history. They should be honest and transparent about this this information, having an accident is not necessarily a deal breaker. You should do your own research and see if the school you're looking at has had any incidents or accidents. Like I say, this is not a deal breaker. Maybe it is, depending on the type of incident, the cause of the incident, what actions were taking place before and after the incident. But to me, it's really not. Running a flight school, either fixed wing or helicopter, things happen. You have people that don't know how to fly, learning how to fly. It's just a dangerous environment. So they do happen. So you just want to know why it happened, what they've done about it, and if the school is being truthful, forthcoming, they're willing to talk about it. Here's what happened, here's what we learned, and this is what we've done to change about it since. All right, student support and resources. Does the school offer career counseling or alumni networks? This is great. When you're going to a flight school, you're going to be able to find jobs afterwards, but it really helps if you have a network within the school. If the school kind of helps set you up, some of their students previously that have gone through the industry, if they can talk to you, maybe they've got like a group chat, a Facebook group. These are great resources to have. So you kind of want to know about that. Are there simulators or ground school resources available? If you're going to a small school, what kind of facilities do they have? Where are you going to be doing your lessons? Is it going to be loud? Is there any quiet spots? Where I went to school, we were right next to the runway, and sometimes we'd have fighter jets and big airplanes and helicopters taking off, and that could become distracting. Do they have nice classrooms? Do they have whiteboards? Do they have simulators? Can you go practice approaches and flying, all sorts of stuff? You don't have to have one, but maybe a school has one and maybe one doesn't, and this goes into your choice if you're thinking about going to this school. What housing support options are provided for students? This is another really big one. Is there student provided housing? How does the school look at housing for students? If there's not, do they kind of have resources to help? Do they have pamphlets, brochures? Can they help you find housing? It's a huge thing if you're going to move, so you need to ask them about this. And then if they do have student housing, which a lot of the big schools do, ask a student that is there currently or message someone on Instagram and ask them what's the vibe of the student housing or the energy when the students get there. Student housing is one of the greatest things that I enjoyed from flight school. I learned so much. A lot of flight and aviation related activities and a lot that were not, and it was a really great time. It was super fun. I really enjoyed having a student housing experience. So that's something you kind of want to think about too. That my flight school was expensive. It was $100,000, but I would have paid that again for the aviation experience, but also the student housing and the memories and the fun. I really enjoyed it. So that's something you might want to think about too. All right, so there you go. Just an interesting list of things you should think about before you go to flight school. These are all things I didn't really think about. So if you're thinking about going to flight school, now you kind of have a list. You should write these out and you can kind of answer them to yourself. And maybe this will help formulate where you should go to school. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. If you found yourself enjoying this video, please smash the like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I'm trying to get this content out to people that want to become helicopter pilots or aviators. I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.